I had a miraculous encounter which I'd like to share. Originally, I put it on my website. It was headed as Joe Brown, Surely This is a Miracle. Basically, God showed me in a dream the wife of Joe Brown as if she was alive, and when in actual fact she'd sadly passed away from terminal cancer in 1991. And it was shortly after her passing that I had this dream. I was ringing the doorbell at the garden entrance of Joe's home, and when Joe came to open the gate, he said to me with a big smile on his face, "Hello, mate." I was invited into the garden area and I was walking towards the house. And I saw, running up behind Joe, his wife, Beaky. And she said to me, "Who is going to tell Joe?" First I was shocked at seeing Beaky, as I knew that she'd already passed away. And then when she spoke to me from behind Joe, I realized that Joe was totally unaware of Vicky's presence. And more importantly, Joe did not hear a word of what Vicky was saying. It was clear to me. Who is going to tell Joe, was what Vicky was saying. Well, when the dream finished, and I said to the Lord, because I felt this was coming from God, and I said that I was a little confused about what the dream meant. So I asked the Lord, please explain to me what and why I was being shown all this in a dream. And God said that he wanted me to go to see Joe and tell him about the dream, and that God wanted Joe to know that there is life after death. I replied and said, well, I don't know Joe anymore, or how to contact him. You know, this was like 1991. The last time I worked with him would have been probably 1965. So all those years. I had actually been in touch with his wife and his daughter, because they sang on a music track that I made probably late 70s. But that was the last time. So the 70s, 20 odd years since I had anything to do with the family. So even if I did know where Joe lived or what he was doing, I was too afraid to go and tell Joe, as he was quite anti-Christian, or I thought he was. I was under that impression that he wasn't too impressed with Christians, because there's a couple of comments he made when I was with him, not about me because I wasn't a Christian at that time, but he just wasn't too, didn't have a lot going for them with the way he spoke. Anyway, so little did I know that Joe's daughter, Sam Brown, also had similar views to her dad, that they didn't believe there was life after death. But apparently, so I heard, that Sam Brown actually changed her mind after her mother's death and started to believe maybe it was wishful thinking, that to see that her mum had not gone to be forever. But anyway, in the meantime, sadly, God kept reminding me about the dream and that I had to get in touch with Joe. But I still didn't know how. And I don't suppose I really made much attempt to get in touch as well, to be honest. But what I'm now going to share is something that only God could arrange. Leslie and I and our two sons, Luke and Joel, had recently returned from driving all the way to Romania and then coming back. We had taken aid for the orphan children in Arad. This was following the demise of Ceausescu in the late 1989, I think it was. And with the help from Jeremy, my brother-in-law, we transformed an old post office van that I'd bought at the auction. We transformed it into a camper-style van where we had the sleeping accommodation for the four of us, and the van also had cooking facilities, a portable loo, and enough room to store clothes for the abandoned babies in the orphanages, which we wanted to take to Romania.
Right, these baby clothes and baby toys and blankets and baby food and bottles and things have been donated. mainly from our family and people from Isha Green Baptist Church. And we're about to load our van up and take it all to Romania. We've got hundreds and hundreds of items, lots of things, haven't we? Where are we going?
Romania.
To Romania, that's right.
On our return back to the UK, we needed to sell this camper van in order to raise enough money to go back to Romania, as we had arranged with one of the maternity hospitals back in Romania to adopt an abandoned baby. Anyway, so therefore selling the van was very important to us as we needed to fly back to Romania this time. And God willing, we could come back with the abandoned baby.
Little Valentine doesn't have a mummy and a daddy. And Roxana also, a little girl. She doesn't have a mum or a dad.
How were we going to pay for the airfares? Selling the van, right. We heard about this place in North London where every Sunday morning you could buy or sell camper vans, particularly the very sought after ones, the VW camper vans. So one Sunday morning, we went to this place. It was in North London somewhere, to see if we could sell our van. But mind you, as you can see from the photos, right, or the video, our van was the ugliest looking camper van ever. It had bolts sticking out the side, and it didn't look anything like the classic camper van that the VW was. They were the bee's knees. What I remember about this day, well, we're sitting there for like 3 hours, and I can remember that it was very cold, it was bleak, and our van just did not present very well. And especially from the outside, as I say, although inside it was very practical in its layout and it looked the bee's knees, but outside it was ugly. So here we are inside the van, freezing. And I tell you what, I can remember we just said, we can't stand this any longer. Let's head back. We're not going to sell the van. We did have an offer, by the way, for about 700, and we needed 2,300 in order to do what we needed to do. So we finally decided to shut the back doors, because we'd had left them open so at least everybody could see how nice our van was inside. And I said to Leslie, okay, let's pray. And this is what I prayed. Heavenly Father, you know we need to sell this van, and we need the money in order to go back to Romania to hopefully adopt this little abandoned baby. Let somebody come up and say, I absolutely love your van, and that they would give us the full asking price of 2,300. And I said, in Jesus' name, amen. I closed the doors, I started the engine, and, well, can you believe it? A car pulls up and just more or less screeches, stops. Can we look at your van? Yeah, sure. Looked inside, pulled the doors. I absolutely love your van. What? The very words I'd prayed. I was being really rather tongue-in-cheek when I said to God about let them say this and that they would pay us the money and everything else. And she said, this is just what we're looking for. I love it. And I said, well, it's 2,300? No problem, she said. My goodness. I can't, you couldn't make this up, could you? Anyway, so Leslie and I could hardly believe our ears. The woman then said, this is just what we need to go touring. And when the woman was speaking to me, I sort of recognized the timbre of her voice. Now this might sound strange, but it isn't to me because I've got quite sort of highly sensitive ears. And I said to her, excuse me, I said, but you sound like someone that I used to work for many years ago, who also had a deep voice like yours. Oh, who was that? This young woman said. I said, Joe Brown. The woman replied, that's my dad. I am Sam Brown, his daughter. Well, you could have knocked me down with a feather. Sam Brown was a famous singer in her own right at that time, but I did not recognize her due to the bobble hat she was wearing, the scarf and all of that. So I didn't recognize her as a person, but there was something about the voice. Anyway, I said, this is an immediate answer to my prayer in more ways than one. Not only did I actually say, somebody would say, I absolutely love your van, which is very tongue-in-cheek, as I said, because it's the ugliest thing you could have seen. But I also was saying, that they would say, this is what we want. And I love your van. Oh, it just was amazing. Anyway, so I said to Sam, I said, you know what? I used to work for your dad, and it's a long time since I've seen him, and I've got a message for him, and I need to contact him. And I said, how do I do that, Sam? So she gave me a business card of the manager of Joe. And Joe's manager, his address and phone number was on there. So what I did, I regret that I wasn't very obedient. I wasn't too happy about calling and speaking directly to Joe. So what I did is I decided I would write a letter. And so I called the manager and I said, could I have the address, and I'll write a letter to Joe. Okay. And anyway, I've got to say that I never did hear back from Joe, but true to what Sam said, she said she was going to buy the van and she didn't have the money on her. And ironically, she said, do you know what? I'm going to have dinner with my dad right now. I was going to have lunch, Sunday lunch. So yeah, great, send my regards, etc. And I will write, da-da-da-da-da, of course. And anyway, the following day, I think it was either the day after that, Sam Brown, true to her word, came over to Thames Ditton, where I was staying with Leslie's mum, and paid us the money, $2,300 in cash. And so we had the money to travel back to Romania to go and adopt our little Rebecca. Now, some would say, was that a coincidence? No, I would say it was a God incidence, and certainly was a way in which it funded our trip, and it also was a complete answer to our prayer, even if I did say it in sort of tongue-in-cheek style. Anyway, as I said, I was still too afraid to pass the message on directly, and I hadn't learned to be totally obedient to God at that stage, and I always felt rather sad that I never got that message directly to Joe. Maybe somebody watching this program could actually pass on the message that about the dream, that the Lord showed me that Vicky was saying to me over Joe's shoulders, who is going to tell him? Who's going to tell Joe? That's what she said, looking at me, and I didn't do it. So hopefully somebody else can actually do that and get in touch with Joe. Yeah? There is life after death. There is the new heaven and the new earth. And there is no more pain or sorrow. And there's going to be a new beginning. Everything is going to be made new. This is the promise in Revelation chapter 21.
When I see her coming down the street, I get so shaky and I feel so weak.
This is my favourite song though, which was composed by Del Shannon. I Go to Pieces. Another #1 hit it was.
And I go to pieces and I wanna hide. Go to pieces. kisses and I almost die every time my baby passes by.
I was reading a couple of the latest comments made by viewers who had listened to this song online, and they wrote, "I was 10. Both my parents were alive and I was safe and life was wonderful. Music like this takes me back to that warm, safe feeling I used to have." Another comment by another person. "My mum just passed away and I keep playing this song. I miss her so much." There are very few songs these days that can affect you in the same way that these great songs do. I was privileged to play the drums for several groups that had #1 hits. Such a group was Unit 4+2.
You to me are sweet as roses in the morning, and you to me are soft as summer rain at dawn. In love we share like something rare. The sidewalks in the street, the concrete and the clay beneath my feet begins to crumble, but love will never die, because we'll see the mountains tumble before we say goodbye.
Whose song Concrete and Clay went to #1 in 1965.
That's the way it's meant to be.
I was supposed to have joined the band from the time they suddenly were to appear on Top of the Pops, but I was in hospital having my tonsils out. Therefore, an actor, Hugh Halliday, had to step in, but eventually I later joined the group, as the newspaper article mentions. Now, another part of my history was an impresario by the name of Laurie Paramore had asked me to form a band to back Billy Fury for a tour that he was doing. I was able to get Ian Hunter, who played the bass, and Ken Markham, who played guitar, and there's myself on drums. And one of the most important venues that we were going to be playing at was Liverpool, which was where Billy Fury was born. And when we first arrived in Liverpool, we set up our kit, and we, as a three-piece band, we did the warm-up, and then Billy Fury came on stage. And sadly, he didn't go down that well that night, but we, as a band, were doing really well. But Billy was a really neat guy. You know, he was gentle soul, and it was really shame that after we finished the short tour, that Ian Hunter actually said to me and Ken, "You know, we really played well together, guys, and as a three-piece band, so why don't we form a group?" And I said, "You know what? I've absolutely had enough of touring and playing the drums for a living," and I turned it down. We were living in Uxbridge Road in Kingston upon Thames at the time, and a couple of years later, Ian Hunter went on to have the best years of fame and fortune with Mott the Hoople. Yeah, all the young dudes. Remember the track? Yeah, that was where we could have been if I'd stayed in the music industry. But I was quite happy to get out of playing, that's for sure. I need to go back to the period when I'd stopped playing the drums for a living, and I was becoming more interested in producing music and working in recording studios. And myself and a guy called Bill Farley, the sound engineer from Regent Sound, who had produced a song with myself for a guy called Mike Leslie, and I managed to get that released.
When I'm short on bread, there's a place that I hit for the penny a key. Penny a key. My baby and me feel like we royalty at the penny a key. Penny a key.
And I was introduced to Jack Baverstock, who was the head of A&R. And one day Jack said to me, "Try and do something with this lot." Played me this track, a band that had made a record with the Philips label, and it was a flop. He'd had one or two tries with them. Well, do you know who it was? The name of that band was Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch. But I took up the challenge and went into the Fontana's own studios, which was below the offices near Marble Arch in central London. We had a good session, and I recorded the song composed by Ken Howard and Alan Blakely, I think it was, and it was entitled "You Make It Move."
You make it move. I love you, girl. You make it
I had not mixed the track, I just was there for the recording, made sure the drums were well recorded, of course, get a big drum sound. Anyway, we just laid down the music and the vocals on top of the music, and it still needed to be mixed and mastered, of course. But soon after the session, the record was released in 1965. It reached number 26 on the UK charts, and this was their first hit record. So after this amazing success, this recording band was now sounding very big. So a little while later, we all went in to meet Jack Baverstock again. The band was there and myself, and I said, well, I tell you what, guys, when we're going to do the next one? Oh, there was a strange silence in the room. Why? They said, we've already made it. I said, what? I was shocked. They didn't even credit me on the record of You Make It Move, and they did, however, pay me a session fee. I think I got 18 guineas, which is about £19 something. And it turned out that an American producer by the name of Steve Rowland had been given the job of mixing the track that I had recorded with the band, and I was dumped. And I have to say that Steve Rowland was a far more experienced producer than I was. I was only just beginning. Anyway, I didn't think they handled that situation very well at all. You know, it was very unkind and a bit ruthless to just suddenly say, well, we've made it, sorry, bug off. The band went on to have numerous hits, and deservedly so. They were a good band. Some of the biggest hits were The Legend of Xanadu, Hold Tight, Bend It, Zabadak, and as they started to fade out in their chart success, guess what the next record was? It was called Snake in the Grass. I thought that was very appropriate. Anyway, that was the end of my little episodes with Fontana Records. The next part of my musical career was when I went to work for the Beatles management company, NEMS Enterprises. I'd like to share my experience working with Brian Epstein and Robert Stigwood. They've managed the Beatles and the Bee Gees, as well as many other famous acts in the 1960s. I'm a lonely kind of guy. Myself and Bill Farley had made a recording with a band called West Point Supernatural. They were from Chippenham in Wiltshire, and the track was entitled Time Will Tell. I was looking for a record label to release this song, so myself and the manager of the band, Bill Maples, we went along to present the recording to Robert Stigwood, who had his own record label, Reaction Records. Reaction Records, which at the time had only signed the Cream, you know, Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce. Stigwood had agreed to release our record. This was very good news for us and also for the band and their manager. But, you know, the thing is, what happened next was Stigwood got sidetracked with something quite stupendous. An amazing act that he signed next. Let me tell you a little bit about how that worked out. Well, I was taken on by Stigwood to work with NEMS Enterprises, and I was looking to try and produce some of their bands, some of their B-sides of records. I was going to start in a small way, and so I began to work with other talented artists who were signed to NEMS, and I learned a lot more about production. And so I worked with the Pretty Things and Billy J. Kramer, some of their recordings. Mainly was B-sides, as I said. And then one day Stigwood asked if I would accompany him to an audition of a band that had come over from Australia. The audition was arranged to be held at one of the West End theatres. I think it was the Savile Theatre, yeah. And we both went to the audition. It was a very young band of brothers, and they were going through their repertoire of their original songs. And within a matter of weeks, not only had this band been signed by Stigwood, they'd also recorded what was to be their first massive hit record. it was in America first, wasn't it? Yeah. Which was New York mining disaster, 1941. Yeah, you got it. This was the Bee Gees. Yet another amazing experience for me, albeit being in the background to some extent, for they went on to sell over 225 million records across the world, that is, and making them among the best-selling music artists of all time. Phenomenal. And to be there, who would have known, to be at that audition, and there was just Robert Stigwood and myself, and he asked me what I thought of the band. I said, well, musically they weren't that well together at the time. Great songwriters, and of course being a drummer, their drummer I didn't think was very good. But anyway, we went on and obviously we saw exactly what happened to them, and sadly some have passed away, but they've still had a great success, more than any other band in the history of the music industry. I'm going to share with you something again. This was another time when a homosexual made an unwanted sexual advance towards me. There were others in high positions in the music world who also had made similar sorts of sexual advances to me. I probably was just too pretty for my own good. A lot of them now are deceased, so not a lot of point bringing it up, but I was beginning to worry about how many more times must I endure these unwanted advances when I was only trying to continue with my career in the music business. It seemed to be that every time I did an audition or met with somebody, they wanted to have sex with me. It got to the point when I shared these advances with my then wife, Annette, who also worked in the film industry. She said, well, that's just the way that it is. She didn't approve of it, of their behavior, but she said, it is what it is. Whereas when I started to share with my friends, my man friends, about these advances and what should I do, they all said to me, just do it, Howard, just do it, and they'll make you famous. Well, I wasn't ready to do that. I didn't want to do that. It wasn't something I could do. I was in a turmoil, and so much so that I found myself one night saying, Dad, I wish you were here. I wish you were alive. My dad had died, when I was 14, and I was saying, I'm in a business I love the music business, but I can't do what they want me to do, to have sex with them. And then I found myself praying in a way to a God that I didn't know anything about God, but I'm trying to find solace somewhere to talk about this. And it's as if God was listening to me, and I sort of said, well, if you are there, help me. Please, help me. And within a matter of weeks, the Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on my door and said, what part does God play in your life? And I said, God doesn't play any part in my life, but I wouldn't mind if he did. I then started to understand the biblical view on same-sex relationships, which made me feel somewhat relieved that it wasn't me, and it wasn't abnormal for me to be repulsed by such sexual advances from men. How can I compare it? I was a vegetarian all my childhood till I was 16. And if I ate a piece of meat, I'd want to be sick. And I'm relating it to, if a man touches me in a sexual way, it repulses me so much that I want to be sick. You understand that this is almost a biological reaction. But it didn't mean to say, as I said earlier, that I hated men who were homosexuals. Some of them were really nice people, polite and fun to be with. I can remember some of them. And we were on tour together and we had great fun laughing, you know, and joking and just getting on with our work. But you know what? I have to choose what sort of life I led. And if it meant getting out of the music business one day, I would do that. I would just have to leave it behind. And that's the way it is. Anyway, Robert Stigwood was so wrapped up with recording and promoting the Bee Gees that I was looking for a new talented singers-songwriters myself, because Robert was abroad a lot of the time in America with the Bee Gees, so I was still working at NEMS Enterprises at that time. So there were songwriters, bands coming in that I was able to meet with and try and find people that were good enough to help them to do their music. And I remember a singer-songwriter called Rod Linton, and he came in and I helped to rearrange some of his songs, and I eventually formed a band around him called Rupert's People, and I managed to include some good musicians to produce a record called Reflections of Charles Brown. I secured a release on EMI Records with this particular song. There was a TV advert at the time which they used to play, and there was a piece of music. It was Bach's Air on a G-string, and I used that around the lyrics that Rod Linton had composed. But I convinced Rod to use the melody of Air on a G-string, and this then became the A-side of Reflections of Charles Brown. My idea to use Air on a G-string as the main melody for a record was also being used for the now famous Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum. Their version was only released a few weeks earlier than ours, and that quickly became a huge hit. Quite rightly so, actually. Much better recording than what we did, to be honest. The prominent instrument on both the versions was the Hammond organ with its howling Leslie sound. And ironically, it was the same organist, Matthew Fisher, who both played on Procol Harum's and Rupert's People's records, doing this Air on a G-string. But our version managed to get into the top 40 in the UK charts, and it also was at number 13 in the Australian charts. It's still now become more a collector's item if you can find the original vinyls. I'd like to share next a little bit about my first marriage, and so we need to go back to the days when I was playing drums for Joe Brown. We were touring around many of the cities in the UK at the time, and it was when we were appearing in the pantomime Aladdin in Shrewsbury that I first met one of the characters in the show, Jack Lee White. He was very kind, and he asked me back to his home to spend the weekend with him and his family. It was a weekend break, and for some reason, I can't remember, I wasn't able to go back home. And so I spent the weekend with Jack's family, his wife Pauline, and his two daughters, Iana, who's the youngest, and his eldest daughter, Annette. Annette and I were the same age, and I think we were both sort of around about 18, maybe coming on 18 at the time, yeah. We were attracted to each other, and basically, eventually we fell in love. And several months later, we got married. Jack Lee White's real name was Jack Whiteley, who was a well-known character actor and played the role of Grandad in The Liverbirds. I'm laughing because he was quite a funny character there. A very popular sitcom. It was a series on the BBC in the late 1960s. Both of us were far too young And, you know, and we had to seek our parents' approval to marry in those days, and that was the law. Our first child was born in December 1967, and it was a period when I had just left working for NEMS Enterprises, Brian Epstein and Robert Stigwood, and I was without a job. And I found it quite challenging to make ends meet. Both managing a pop group, Rupert's People, who I mentioned earlier, they were a constant drain on our finances. We also had repayments on a bank loan. I think it was £1,000 that we borrowed, and that's, as I say, value today probably 20,000 equivalent to. We borrowed the money because we funded all the recordings and also promoting the band. We did a music video and also bought all the equipment. We were also very near broke. Fortunately, Miles Copeland, the brother of Stuart Copeland, the drummer of the famous band The Police, who was, you know, had Sting as their lead singer, well, much to our relief, Miles Copeland took over managing Rupert's People. It was such a good feeling to be shot of continually paying out for the band's needs. But now, we had no prospects of earning any money. So, however, little did we know what was just around the corner. I used to smoke in those days, and had done so from the age of 14, so smoking and drinking was part of my normal lifestyle. For one reason or another, I did not ever get into drugs, okay? It was something I just couldn't do. I didn't want to lose my control of my faculties, and the biggest advert for me not to take drugs was watching other people in the industry when they would get stoned and they were high on drugs. I didn't want to look like that, and I reckon it had a lot of harm. It caused a lot of harm to people. People looked like 5 or 10 years older than me who'd been on drugs for a long time. So yeah, it was good that I just stuck to smoking, if you like. Anyway, I was smoking one day, and my newborn child, Charlotte, was there in a cot, and a friend of mine said to me, "Oh, you need to stop smoking, Howard." I said, "What? You know, what's wrong? It's my life." Then he said, but he pointed at Charlotte and he said, "What about her? She's taking in the smoke that you're letting out as you breathe out into the air." You know what? I'd never thought of it that way. And I stopped smoking right there and then. When I saw that my child was suffering because of my selfishness and smoking, I stopped. And you know, I tried many, many times to stop smoking. But being in the music business, being in recording studios, being whatever, there's a lot of, you know, stress and strain, and smoking was the best thing for what I thought was to keep us calm. And from that day forward, I've never smoked again. But I needed my friend to be just as pointed as he was. And I want to thank my friend for his comments, because it really hit home how I was damaging our baby's health. I'd never considered that before. And in those days, in the 60s, mid-60s, it was, you know, let's face it, it was something that pretty much everyone did. It's not like today where it's, you know, a no-no. Annette and I decided that we'd renovate this old apartment because we'd had to leave because we couldn't afford to pay the rent on our other apartment. And it was something which was an old, dilapidated basement. The ceilings were falling in, it needed restoration, needed new bathrooms and all of that. But I needed to find a way to make some money. And having recently handed over the management of the pop band to Miles Copeland, but we did have the musical equipment, including a brand new Ford Transit van, which we had on finance. So we did have some musical kit, and what happened next is quite interesting. So somehow Decca Records got hold of my telephone number, and they'd heard that I had a special piece of equipment. It was a Leslie, which is part of what goes with a Hammond organ, like a B3 or a C3. And we'd adapted it so you could put a guitar into it rather than the keyboard. And Decca Records called me and they said, we need that. We need to rent it from you for a recording session for the newly signed band, the Moody Blues. So this is what we did. We started to do business with Decca Records. And it was just at the right time, because we couldn't afford to pay the rent on our apartment. So along comes a once-in-a-lifetime break, and it all began with a conversation with Decca Records. And the conversation went something like this. Can we hire or rent the Leslie speaker, which connects to the guitar, and we want to do this for 4 days. And also, would you deliver it? And we need it immediately. Okay, I agreed a price including delivery and pickup. And by the way, this was for the Moody Blues, who had recently signed to Decca Records. And although I'd never rented out musical equipment prior to this date, we just desperately needed some income from somewhere. The sums involved were quite small. I think I charged them 8 guineas. 8 guineas is like £8 and 8 shillings, so it was a little bit more than saying £8. Then they wanted it delivered as well, and I charged them, I was so original, another 8 guineas for delivery. And they wanted it picked up, and I charged them another 8 guineas for picking it up. So that was it's 24 guineas. Wow, that was a lot of money. Our rent at that time was, I think, just £6, £7 a week. So, you know, it was good money in those days. Anyway, Decca Records agreed, and at the end of the conversation, that was it. And I thought, oh, well, great, you know, we've got some money coming in for this month. That's great. But Decca Records was just the beginning of a huge turnaround in our immediate future. How come, you might ask? Well, it was like this. About an hour later, after having that call, Decca Records rings me back, and they said, well, I think her name was Jackie, yeah, that's right. And it was the same lady who called me earlier, and she said, we have another musical instrument that we need. And she said, and do you have this? And she started to make a list of the things that she wanted. And I said, well, look, tell you what, send me that list, and or I'll call you back, or ring me back, or whatever, and I'll see what I can do, okay? And I'm really pleased that I did that, because these were also needed for the Moody Blues recording sessions, so they were very important. And I thought very quickly, yeah, I'll tell you what, because I didn't have very much else. I did have a few instruments and amplifiers and things from handling Rupert's people, so we had, you know, a reasonable amount of instruments. And as I say, we had the van as well. Anyway, so I say to Jackie, yeah, give me that list that you need, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. That's the way it ended. Believe it or not, responding in the way I did, I think if I hadn't have done that, I would have missed one of the biggest opportunities of my life, okay? And before I share the amazing things that would change our lives, I first want to explain some of the backgrounds as to what the situation was and what we were personally facing at that time as a family. You know, I had my wife and our newborn baby, and we couldn't afford the rent we were in. Anyway, this is what happened. I'd started to become interested in learning about God. And for the first time in my life, I could see that seeking success at any price, which was the way I was thinking before this encounter I'm going to share with you. Anyway, I had to change my mind, and I did eventually, thank God. I do recall hearing scriptures read out at school, assembly times, for example. Scriptures like, the meek will inherit the earth. But I'd come to the conclusion when I left school that only the strong could come or get to be wealthy in this world, and also the strong to rise to the highest positions in life. It's not going to be the meek and mild that are going to get there. This is what I was thinking, because they'd be just trodden on, they get abused, whereas if the stronger you are, the more forceful you are in this world, you will get to the top. That was my thinking, you know. So I become a little bit hard-nosed. So having left school, as I said, and working in the big bad world for a few months, I realized that I needed to change my mind. As I read more of the scriptures for myself, I could see my attitude was wrong. I changed my mind to the point where I said to God, you know what? I'll do things your way and not my way. I will learn to be content with less and bide my time, and Lord, your will be done in my life, and I will stop striving to be rich. And at the same time all this was going on, I was reading the Bible and talking to Decca Records, who were wanting to rent more kit from us as the time went on, and knowing that our landlord was pressing us for the rent. So I explained to my landlord, I said, look, I've got money coming in from Decca Records. This will probably be a few weeks before it comes in. Oh, he says, no, this wasn't good enough for him. He wanted his money right there and then, or, this is what he said to me, tell you what, if you can't pay the rent by next week, get out. Leave the apartment. Wow. So the next week came. We still didn't have any money, and I actually said, you know, look, we've got money coming in from Decca, you know. No, don't believe any of that. So therefore, Annette and myself and our little baby, we moved out of the apartment. By the way, my landlord, he reminded me of the Pluto, the horrid character in Popeye cartoons. He really just looked like him as well. Big pot-belly beard. And my landlord, I tried also to have his way with my wife. Pluto was always trying to take over Popeye's girl as well, wasn't he?
Shashi.
One time, final.
Hey, for a little ride, huh? Here we go.
Matthew, a friend of Annette's, had very kindly led us to move in with him whilst we were looking for somewhere more permanent. He had a large apartment in a very old building, and so we moved in with him. But he also asked his landlord if we could rent the basement, which needed a lot of renovation, as it had been dilapidated, I don't know, since the end of the Second World War, because the ceilings were all coming down, and it just was in bad repair. It needed a lot of money spent on it. But anyway, so it needed a total rebuild. We were willing to do it. We took on a 21-year lease, but the thing is, how do we pay for a new kitchen, new bathroom, and all the things that it needed? It didn't have any heating in there. It was in a real bad state. So not only was it a question of, you know, how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take? Fortunately, Matthew let us stay with him for quite a while till we started work on this particular basement. So thinking in terms not only having to pay the rent on the place, but what do we do about starting the renovation? And I can remember that ironically it was our milkmen that were starting to show interest in this old dilapidated apartment in the basement. And we said to them, you know, do you know any builders? And they said, well, actually, we'll do it for you. And I thought, what, milkman? He said, no, I'm really a builder. You know, he said, I'm thinking of getting out of the milk delivery business, and I'm going to take on building work, and myself and my colleague will come and work on this. And I said, well, I have no money right now, but if I was to pay you, because we've got money coming in, hopefully from Decca Records, and when that starts to flow, you do the work on an ongoing basis without saying, or I suppose, making a commitment to pay a certain amount. We'll do it when we get money in until the money runs out, and then you stop, you go back to doing your milk delivery or whatever. Anyway, that's the way we did. But at least I was now at peace about taking one day at a time. So the next phone call I had with the lady at Decca Records was going to be crucial. We'd just moved into Matthew's apartment, and the good thing was that I was able to supply all the musical equipment that the Moody Blues required for their recording sessions. And this was at Decca Records studios in London. And I managed to borrow some of the items, other musical pieces that they wanted, because I had friends or shops that knew me, that they said, look, you just borrow these and bring them back. Okay, so that was really nice. But this was the beginning of one of the most lucrative ventures of my life. We, the Condors, Annette and I, that was, prospered very much over the next few years, until the beginning of the oil crisis in the early 1970s. And after building a good relationship with Decca Records, I eventually plucked up enough courage to ask Jackie at Decca why they gave us all their business. Supplying all the equipment, they came to us, whereas in the past they would do business with other organizations. The answer to my question was simply that Decca Records said they were able to rely on us totally, on our ability to always come up with the goods. And what we were able to supply and was at the time they wanted it, and we were always on time. Basically, we were reliable. And whereas in the past, Decca would book the musical kit from various retail stores in London, and then they'd send a taxi to pick up the items. And when the taxi got to the music shops, often they'd sold the guitar or whatever it was that they were going to rent to Decca Records. And the taxi would arrive to pick them up, and that was it. It was, that all the shops were interested in was selling the kit. So this wasn't a reliable way for Decca to actually rent their kit, especially for top artists like the Moody Blues, the Rolling Stones was another one of their artists, and so there was many others as well. But we were reliable. We never let them down, and that's what we established, was that we were going to be the most reliable service in a professional manner. And there's a little anecdote I'd like to share with you. On one occasion, I received a phone call in the middle of the night from the Moody Blues, and they were doing a recording session at Decca, and they just needed a set of strings for the guitar. And I said, okay, all right, I can get a set of strings to you. And this was the middle of the night. And so I got in my van, took the strings over to the studios, and because I was 21 years of age at the time, and I even looked much younger than that. I always was looking younger for my age, and it seems to a certain extent, followed me through my life. And so I didn't declare that I was the boss, okay? I was just simply the driver of the van. Therefore, I took it to the Moody Blues, and the guy said, thank you very much for bringing the strings. It's what we needed. Please tell Mr. Conder thank you very much as well. All right? I said, I will do that, sir. I will do that. I didn't dare let on that I was Mr. Conder, because I was too young for my age, and I wanted to appear that Conder, or Conder Enterprises as it was the name of my company, had some older dude that was running the business. Well, I supplied, or Conder Enterprises supplied most of the kit for the Moody Blues for all of their recordings at that time. We even hired the bass flute, the mellotron, a Martin 6 and a Martin 12-string guitar, which was quite old. I think it was they were aged about, or made around about 1945. They were very good sounding instruments. We had other instruments that we rented to the Moody Blues. Mellotron, as I said, Hammond organs. They were like the B3s and C3s. And I used to deliver a lot of these on my own, but however, the Hammond organ was split. So anybody who knows what a Hammond organ is, it's so big and heavy. But I was determined to do a lot of the things myself. My wife Annette handled the phone calls and all the orders, and I would make the purchases of the new equipment, and I would deliver the musical kit, and I would look after all that side. And I provided a really good, reliable service, as I said, for all the recording companies at that time. So coming back to the basement, do you know what? By this time, the basement had been finished. We had a beautiful home. We had a baby grand piano in there. We had beautiful antiques, lovely furnishings. It looked amazing. It was a huge flat. But everywhere you looked, there was musical instruments, a Hammond organ, a B3, a mellotron, a Fender Rhodes piano, Wurlitzers, and all sorts of other guitars and amps. The apartment was so full I could hardly move. And so we decided that we would actually do something about this, and we looked for retail shop where we could run the business from. And it was simply an amazing blessing. But you know, just to recap, I'd made a deal with God that I would stop pursuing things in the way that I was doing it. You know, I was determined initially to be rich. By the time I was 21, I wanted to have my first Rolls Royce. And, you know, it's just the usual things which were being in a young person's mind, particularly in those days. And I'd changed my mind. I started reading the Bible, as I said, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do things God's ways, and I'm just going to calm down, you know. So I could just see now that God was blessing us really incredibly. My wife and my daughter Charlotte. It was from that time on that a huge breakthrough came for us as the Condors. Do you know, it's quite interesting, mention at this time, we had people who were friends of ours when we were like just in the normal day-to-day living type of earning capacity, having worked with Brian Epstein and Robert Stigwood and getting, I think it was £20 a week in those days. You know, but even so, your rent was only £6, so you had a reasonable amount of money left. But what happened was that some of our friends started to get jealous and sort of, it was really awkward. And I remember talking to one of our dear friends and saying, you know, what is it? You know, we've moved into a different part of our life, and we were doing well financially, but you're still our friends. You know, we don't want to lose you. And they thought, well, you know what? You were going up the ladder quite well, and we just felt that we weren't part of your group anymore. And I said, that's not. You know, you are friends. You don't think that way. And I think jealousy is a terrible thing, really. And you know, I think people. It was sad. Let me just put it like that. By the time I was 23 years old, I opened the Howard Conder Music Centre at number 8 Eden Street, Kingston upon Thames in Surrey. This was to be our next big adventure. And we started to do really well. We had enormous premises, and we started to do business with Johnny Nash, for example, and Bob Marley. Hi, I want to tell you a story, but it's true. I don't like the word story because it sounds like it's made up. But I was asked by a magazine on the Costa del Sol in southern Spain to write an article about how I met Bob Marley. It wasn't in Jamaica, that's the point. And it wasn't in Kingston town. It was in Kingston upon Thames, here in the United Kingdom.